What's going on, football fans? It's Diggs Report right here, back to another video, and I am joined by two returning guests.
Hey man, how's it going?
Hey man, glad to be here.
All right, so what we're doing today, we're actually doing a roundtable type of thing. We are talking about the changes that have been going on in college football for the past few years. We're going to be talking about recruiting in the transfer portal. We're going to be talking about the name, image, and likeness, and we're going to talk about possible playoff expansion. We're going to start off with recruiting in the transfer portal. And with recruiting, I mean, we got to talk about what it was like having officials again for the 2022 cycle, because we did not have them for the 2021 cycle because of COVID, but they came back and we definitely saw a difference from not having them to having them again. Ahmed, you're the one that's been covering recruiting. What differences did you see in 2021 when there were no officials?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely saw a lot more prospects that wanted to take more officials just during the summer, get that over with. Point that you really hear throughout the recruitment process, a lot of kids, when they come up with their commitment timeline, it usually falls, they want to commit before their senior year or they want to commit after. And the ability to take the officials beginning in June, it really changed a lot of things. And a lot of coaching staffs were tasked with really having to I guess, manage when you were going to bring a kid in. If you knew that he was going to decide soon, you'd bring him in for a summer official. If you thought he was going to wait till the fall and he wanted to take a summer official, it's kind of like, we get you want to take a visit, but how realistic are chances to land you right now if you're not going to decide for another couple months. But it was just massive, just the ability to get that normalcy back in the recruiting trail a little bit. I think just the 21 class, you're starting to see a lot more guys enter the transfer portal, things like that. But just the ability for guys to check things out on their own, see things for themselves, meet coaches, definitely made a huge difference in the class.
Yeah, we saw one of three things. We either saw in the 2021 class, we either saw kids commit to schools that they had never visited, either just commit to a school that they had visited before, or in the case of the defense tackle that committed to Ohio State, just wait till officials officially open back up and then take them.
Yeah. And I also think like you mentioned, just the ability to not see these schools before you commit and sign, things like that. And you're also seeing, I mean, just the downside of COVID and whatnot, just the amount of scholarship spots that pretty much vanished. And then you would have kids that, thought they had 10 offers and then it became 0. And then it was, you just had to find a place. And I think that also was an aspect that maybe got overlooked.
Sam, anything you want to add to this before we move on?
Yeah, I think there's a lot that you can learn as a person, just like a student athlete going through those official visits that you can't learn through other means. Like, until you're physically on campus and you're meeting the people, you really can't say how good of a fit a program is going to be for an athlete. So to have those go away, it's kind of like shooting in the dark as an athlete. Oh, am I picking a program that's actually right for me? Or am I just getting all the fluff that I'm getting from these other communications? And then getting that back, I think, is really important. And then I think the point about just how difficult, like, the recruiting and the scholarships and all that come in. I know we're probably going to talk about it later, but just the loss of scholarships that we saw for high school students because of just COVID and all that, and trying to maintain that the current athletes had scholarships and they could continue playing, I think is a huge issue. But I think the fact that we're getting kind of back to a normalcy when it comes to recruiting is really good for the high school athletes coming into college, because there's a lot of times that you go in and you're like, this is my dream school. And then you go there and you're like, oh, this isn't as good as I thought it was. And then maybe you go somewhere else and you're like, they were down on my list, but coming here, it seems like a good environment.
Yeah, we do see that a lot. You make a really good point. All right, let's move on to the transfer portal, which, as Ahmed saw, we saw a lot of kids go into the transfer portal this year. And to me, I feel like transfer portal has been both good, but it's also had some negative effects as well. With the way the transfer portal is, I mean, you put your name in there and you're letting these schools know that, hey, I am open to leaving, but you're also kind of leaving the door open. We don't see that as often, but we do see kids that go into the transfer portal, they take their name out. But really, with this, it does give kids a little more freedom. And that is something that really they've needed, because, I mean, you could be stuck in a situation where either like the head coach is fired or there's a scandal going on. And for you to be able to leave, that's something that's really good, so that you can be put in a better spot. But there's also a case where, well, maybe they're leaving a little too early, or they feel like they're not getting a fair chance, but they just needed a little more time. That could be a problem. But really, with something like this should have happened a long time ago. Let's be honest.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I kind of think that the transfer portal, I mean, we got to think like back in the Randy Edsel days, when players are transferring, and he was blocking kids from transferring to conference, to kid transferring to a school within 150 miles of its hometown. So the transfer portal is just, in my opinion, the complete extreme on the opposite end of the spectrum. But what the issue is that I think, I think what's getting overlooked, and colleges, these programs are going to be battling the scholarship distribution offer counts for these next couple of seasons, for the next probably 2-3 cycles. It's going to take time for everything to kind of stabilize. But, and Maryland had it as well, but players that are transferring out with no film, with limited film. And that's why a lot of these high school prospects lost their spot, because college kids with college film that showed that they can be a serviceable replacement at the group of five or at the Power Five level. They're viewed as a more immediate addition compared to the high school prospect. So that's kind of one aspect. I mean, like a walk-on, for example, if you do not have any reps and you're entering the transfer portal and you are at a Power Five program, you're more than welcome to do that if you want that to be what's best for you. And that's why the transfer portal exists. But I think, just where are you going to get a landing spot? Where are you going to get that offer? I think that's kind of the biggest issue.
Yeah. And that's what I said. And that's what I was talking about earlier. When you see kids that are transferring probably a little sooner than they should, probably give it a little more time. Sam, what do you got to add to this?
I think the transfer portal, I think it's great that it gives players the opportunity to move, because, you've seen historically in the past coaches who've been able to just pick up and take another job. Like, you think about Lincoln Riley's situation in Oklahoma. He's under contract in Oklahoma, and then he's like, well, I want a different situation. So now you have all of these players. Well, if the coach can move freely, why can't the players?
Not to mention Kevin Steele, what he did to Maryland a week ago.
So I think it's good that it gives players the opportunity to move. But then there's always this idea that kind of iron sharpens iron. And like these kids who are sitting on the bench in the depth charts, who will get better by practicing with the talent that's above them in the depth chart. I think that's definitely a real concept. Like, you look at Alabama has players who are willing to sit on the depth chart and wait their turn, and then they come out and they still go to the NFL. And that's a unique situation. There's not a lot of other programs like Alabama. But I think players get the idea that the grass is greener on the other side. So they say, well, if I'm going to be sitting on the bench at this program, I could go start at another program. I could potentially start at another program, and then that will boost my situation. But it turns out that other program isn't a better fit for them, and all of this kind of thing. So there's a lot of freedom, but that results in a lot of players kind of moving on to situations that aren't better for them. And I think at some point it's going to normalize, because I think players are going to sit back and think maybe it is too early to transfer. But I think since now it's such a new concept, like this is what, year 3 of the transfer portal in its existence, year 2, year 3. I think as it develops more, there's going to be less and less of this, oh, my issues can be solved by the transfer portal.
Yeah. And I think about the players that probably should benefit the most from this. And going back to Maryland, I mean, you see Brian Cobbs, Daryl Jones, and Carlos Carrier, they all enter the transfer portal. And I think they all ended up at spots where they could excel. I mean, Ahmed, you would agree with that?
Yeah, like 100%. Like Brian Cobb's, Carlos Carrier, I think he's like you mentioned, like that's a guy that gave himself an opportunity, and that's another aspect about the transfer portal and scholarships and all that. So those super seniors that were able to come back in 2021, they didn't count against the scholarship distribution chart or the scholarship limit, the 85-man scholarship limit. But if those players are returning in 2022, those players do count against the scholarship limit. So that's why you're also seeing, and people want to say, oh, Maryland had one of the most, I think they were top three. They're still currently top three in the number of players that have transferred out. But that's a big reason why, because all these super seniors have come out. But like you mentioned, all these guys have been able to go to pretty good spots. Brian Cobb's pretty interesting note. He's going to be playing under Anthony Tucker, who was the former running back coach at Maryland. And Tucker and Cobbs don't really have too much of a connection, but that I did think that was kind of interesting that he'll get a chance to kind of flourish under a former Terp.
Yeah, and that's a good segue going to talking about the kind of effect that the transfer portal has had on recruiting. We touched on it a little bit, but we did see a downward trend in recruiting this year. I mean, we saw a lot of schools take less than 20 kids, especially in the top 20, because of the portal and the extra year. Because like you said, the extra year is now against the scholarship limit, whereas it wasn't last year. What do we think is going to happen when we finally start to get back to a normalcy without the extra year? And once people finally get an understanding of how the transfer portal should work, what should we see with recruiting in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be very interesting. I mean, I think that you're kind of seeing these colleges utilize maybe the transfer portal the way they did maybe JUCOs before, but just the ability to add these high impact transfers or high impact additions. It's kind of hard to say. I do think like just the high school recruiting overall is going to normally stabilize, but I do think just the addition of the transfer portal and the overwhelming or the freedom to enter. And also, I think, a part that we don't talk about that I think everyone knows, but no one talks about is just the tampering that goes on. And it's not the direct tampering. It's always, just like one coach just reaching out to another. It's all, back channels and whatnot. But you'll still see that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think it's still going to take another 2-3 years before the high school side just kind of irons out.
Sam, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think you make a great point about using, like, it's going to kind of resemble that JUCO recruiting base where kids are going to a JUCO program to get some film, get some time in that kind of program, and then go to these Power 5 programs. I think with high school recruiting the way it is, with so many programs taking so few high school recruits and relying on the transfer portal and their players who've gotten extra eligibility, I think you're going to see some of these talented players go into smaller programs with the intent to transfer out to a bigger program. And I'm sure there's college coaches who are saying, hey, we don't have a spot for you right now. You go to another program. We'll see how things look in a year or two in the transfer portal, kind of keeping that dream alive for those athletes. So I think there will be a normalization. But I think you're going to see a lot of these talented players go into programs that you wouldn't expect them to go to years past, just because of how different this situation is. I'm not saying you're going to see random group of 5 programs pick up a whole bunch of 4-star recruits and then eventually blow it up. But I'm thinking there's probably going to be some players here and there in smaller programs who excel and then end up transferring through in the transfer portal.
Yeah, and I think that's actually right. And one point I want to add is, you mentioned, just like the spot, down the line that could potentially be open. And there are definitely instances where I've heard of players that are considering entering the transfer portal, and they know that, hey, school X, I know that they want me, but they're not going to have a scholarship available till spring, or the school, school B, they're not going to have a scholarship open until June. And you mentioned, a lot of JUCOs. I've noticed a couple of Power 5 players have gone JUCOs, and I've had a couple of college coaches say that JUCOs, probably HBCUs, are going to be the one that really benefit the most from these guys that kind of get squeezed out, that are still really good, that could probably make that Power 5 contribution in any normal year. But just, obviously just with the scholarship distribution, how everything's shaken out. But yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, you guys make great points. And, you're talking about HBCUs, and that just keeps me in mind of maybe Jackson State's a little ahead of the curve with that because of the recruits that they've gotten the past few cycles, which is still crazy in my eyes. It's still crazy in my eyes.
At first, I thought it was wild when I thought, Travis Hunter going to Jackson State. But then I think it really set in when I saw something that said Jackson State is gonna give more for Travis Hunter than Florida State was gonna give for Travis Hunter, and I just think that you watch a guy that's going to this program and gonna help rejuvenate and all the NIL deals that are going to be centered around him and targeted for him because he is that guy. You can really make the argument that he's the face. Florida State, I still think he would have been a difference maker, but he would have just eventually just been another piece. And, next year they would have had another game changer piece that they'd have alongside Travis Hunter. So it dilutes maybe that importance, that magnitude. But you're right, and then when you think about, obviously outside of the financial aspect, you think about being coached by Deion Sanders, and it's like, if your dream is to get to the NFL, well, you see players in North Dakota State that are going round 1, round 2. What is really the argument for you have to go to these bigger programs to get the exposure? Because between the Senior Bowls, between all these bowls, these opportunities at the end of these seasons, if you're good enough, the scouts will find you. So
that was true back in the 70s, and it's still true nowadays. Let's keep that in mind.
I mean, I went to Frostburg State for undergrad, and we had a player, Niall Scott, from a Division III program who had just started tasting playoff experience in Division III. I've seen many NFL scouts on the sidelines, 49er scout, Dolphin scout, all these other kind of scouts lining up to watch a Division III player from a program that just started getting some experience at a Division III level. So if you're a talented player, the NFL will find you. So I think we're starting to wake up to that a little bit more, that you don't need to be a 5-year player at Alabama in order to get to the NFL, although being at Alabama helps. But and I think when you're talking about Travis Hunter being at Jackson State, I mean, he's going to get so much experience just from being under Deion Sanders and being that face of the program with those NIL deals and that kind of thing that he wouldn't get at Florida State. And I think that there's going to be a couple other players, but I wouldn't expect this to be the trend, to be honest, to see these top 5 recruits go into these really small programs for this kind of exposure.
I agree. I still think it's going to be like anomalies, but I will say, like, I think it's not going to be as surprising. I think you could see more cases of it. I think even at the Under Armour our Army All-American game, there was another top 100 player that ended up signing with Jackson State. So I also think Jackson State is getting that additional bump because of the Deion Sanders and whatnot. But agree. I think it's just it's a cool trend.
Yeah, that it is. And speaking of NIL, we are moving on to that right now. Now, I think we all can agree this is something that the NCAA should have gotten ahead of a long time ago. This is something that should have been implemented because it was ridiculous. I remember when Todd Gurley got suspended for selling his jersey. It's like, really? You're going to crack down on that and give him a 3-game suspension? Come on.
Yeah. Wasn't that whole thing set up too? It was like a Bama fan that like orchestrated the whole event and then ratted him out, if I recall correctly.
I don't remember how if you got out. I just remember seeing that. I'm just thinking you're focusing on the wrong thing. So it should have gotten ahead of this. And it's going to be interesting to see what's going to happen a few years when we really start to see a normalization of this. I mean, I think it was Quinn Ewers who reclassified, was the number 1 player, committed to Ohio State and signed an NIL deal for like 3 years. It was like for over $1 million. And then he decides to go and transfer right after the season. It's like, wow. So that guy just lost a lot of money for 1 year of a 3-year deal. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens and the kind of deals that are going to happen with this. And we have seen some news come out of this. I think it was Nick Saban that talked about Bryce Young and the deals that he was getting where it was 7 figures. So it's going to be interesting how this continues to grow.
Yeah, NCAA definitely needs to kind of get ahead of it and whatnot. I do think it's just kind of interesting. Maryland's a school that's really using NIL as more of like the opportunity to build your brand, the exposure, things like that, the way it should be. And then you have the schools like Texas who are, just using it to skirt around rules and just get players. So I think it's just interesting, but just the lack, and Damon Evans mentioned it, but just the lack of overall federal legislation and just restrictions around NIL. It's just kind of wild, wild west right now, and there's a lot of loopholes. So I think that they're just a lot of the inconsistencies right now are the biggest issue. But players 100% should have that ability to monetize their own success and their own brand. So I definitely won't support or won't belittle or say NIL is a bad thing at all. I think they deserve it. Like I said, it's just the lack of clarity has made it very, very difficult.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the biggest failure is the NCAA not getting ahead of it. Like you guys have mentioned, the fact that the NCAA just was not prepared for this to be a reality, and then it existing in the form that it does, where you have these massive programs that have massive donors being able to kind of just throw money and work through these loopholes for recruiting and all this kind of thing is absolutely a failure on the NCAA's part. And I think there needs to be some more regulation and some more structure to it. But again, I agree that the players absolutely deserve to be compensated for their name, image, and likeness. But I don't think this should be an avenue for a high school kid to make a multi-million-dollar advertisement deal with Texas or with Austin's local massive car company, just as a way to get that athlete into this program. So I hope that there's some more regulation that comes from the NCAA in terms of rules and closing some of these loopholes. Because I think it's going to it's creating this unregulated market of recruiting, which kind of goes against like the whole, like the integrity of it, like the idea of what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to compensate these star athletes for their performance at a level that they used to not be able to be compensated for. And now it's kind of turning into this twisted beast that it is.
This is how I see it. Right now, I think we are at baseball free agency. MLB, no salary cap, not a lot of restrictions. Basically, you could do whatever you want. And I think what you need to do is get to more of the NFL free agency, where there's a salary cap. There are rules in place so that not one team is signing every single good free agent. So I think that's where we need to start seeing. We need to start seeing more towards that and not seeing more MLB, because we do not want to see another MLB situation. Did that make sense?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I think there's also another interesting point that kind of goes against my whole argument for NIL. But when it comes to parity in terms of college football, I think it's actually going to increase that top end parity the way that NIL is structured. This might be a little bit of a hot take, but if you have programs like Texas, Texas A&M, USC, who can start throwing a little bit more money and getting better recruits, then you're going to see these programs perform more. And it's not just going to be Alabama and Georgia and Ohio State every year, which one of those three is going to win the national championship. So I think, oddly enough, it's going to help that top end parity. Obviously, the next tier down is going to be hurting because those players that would be going to those programs are going to go to other programs for bigger money. I think you'll see some of these programs. I mean, Texas, they haven't been talked about since they won the national championship, since that era, since mid 2000s, and now it's 2022. So maybe finally these big programs who are supposed to be blue bloods are going to be able to compete, but again, they're competing for the wrong reasons because they're able to benefit in that way. And again, I don't want to make it seem like I don't think players should be compensated. I absolutely feel like players deserve this opportunity to earn this money at this level.
Little bit of devil's advocate, Texas has been getting a lot of really good players, but they haven't really been developing them that much. I remember when Tom Herman came in, he got a really, really good class. He got a whole bunch of top 20 kids from Texas didn't do anything with it. So, I mean, we've seen Texas get a lot of kids. They just haven't developed them. But another point to this, I think every single school can take advantage of this. I mean, we're seeing schools take advantage of this in different ways. Ahmed brought up both Texas and Maryland, how they're doing this in different ways, but some can take advantage of this more than others. I mean, besides the Blue Bloods, what schools do we think can really sell this to a kid besides Blue Bloods?
I was gonna say I don't consider USC a blue blood anymore because they've been so bad for so long. But
Yeah, I think that's fair.
yeah,
That is.
But I mean, it's USC, so I guess you're still gonna go with it. I don't know. Do you consider Miami? I don't consider Miami a blue blood, but I definitely. I mean, right now when you look at them, just the whole administration, how Manny Diaz came in, how the new AD came in, everything reeks 6-7 figure, 8 figure deals. So that's a place where you can definitely take advantage. I think that's kind of one that comes to mind. North Carolina is another that I think is they can do pretty well with it.
Yeah, and also remember some of these schools. I mean, that's the only football team in the state. That's the biggest football team in the state. So that could help those schools a little more than others, like West Virginia.
Yeah, I was actually just thinking that. I was actually in Morgantown for a period of time for my school. I was at the main hospital there, and I saw billboards all around town of like law firms that had their offensive linemen plastered on the billboard, all this kind of thing. And you think just about the region of West Virginia and Morgantown. I mean, you have Cincinnati, which is a couple-hour drive. You have a Cleveland couple-hour drive, Pittsburgh couple-hour drive. But really, it's West Virginia football when you go to West Virginia. So schools like that absolutely can kind of take advantage of that and kind of help them out.
All right. Any last minute thoughts on the NIL before we move on?
No, I think that's actually a good point. Just the ability to kind of capitalize on that. Penn State is another where when you talk about, you go to Pennsylvania, it's kind of Penn State football. I mean, you look, obviously Pittsburgh is predominantly Pitt, but you definitely can make the argument that Penn State does not or draws a level of fanfare that Pitt doesn't. So I think that, that they're a school, but yeah, you're right. I just think the size of the deals, things like that, it's kind of interesting. You're kind of balancing it out between some of these programs that are able to provide maybe a heightened level of exposure versus a heightened level of dollars. So I think there's appeals on both sides of it.
Sam, any last minute thoughts?
Yeah, I think we pretty much covered all of the pros and cons of it and how it's kind of affecting, not infecting, college football.
All right, so we're going to move on to possible playoff expansion. Now, this has been brought up literally every single year for the past, 4 years, 5 years? Ever since this started?
Feels like it.
I feel like when they first came out with the 4-team, everyone was like, well, why not 8-team? So even before we had our first college football playoff game, people were asking for expansion.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen people talk about 8. We've seen people talk about 12. What's a good number to have? Because we all consider 4 to be too little, but what could be considered too many? What do you guys think?
I think 8 is probably magic number. I feel like you can kind of work it out where, Power 5 conferences are able to get, all of them are able to secure a bid, maybe an at-large, and then you grab a group of 5 team if worthy, things like that. And I just think 8, when you look at usually who those top 8 teams are, you can make the argument sometimes depending on how strong of the year, maybe teams from 7 to 10, how true of a contender are they? But, it feels like every single year you make the argument that 5, 6, those teams that end up being that end up missing out, they have quality teams, things like that, and just expanding to 8 probably maintains that integrity while just breaking up the parity a little bit.
I think the right answer is 8. I think being able to give the Power 5s a automatic qualifier by winning their conference and then having 3 at-large bids for group of 5 or for other Power 5s that don't win. I think 8 is the right answer, but I have a hot take. I think 4 is fine because I think when you look at it, there may be 5 or 6 teams every year that can compete, but every single year of the college football playoffs, you've seen blowouts in the semifinals. So teams that have made it there have just like once the, like that was their goal, was just to make it, and then they obviously like they're not at the same level as the Alabama, the Clemsons of the past, not this year obviously, but the Ohio States, that kind of thing. Not saying that the lower seeds can't win, because I mean the first year Ohio State won as a 4 seed. I feel like it's better to say, oh well, this team should have made it in, rather than saying, oh, these 3 teams definitely should not have been in the playoffs.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, we're all complaining that 4 is too little, but we do see blowouts. I mean, like this year when Georgia pretty much dominated Michigan, and I'm not going to go and say that Alabama dominated Cincinnati. They dominated them on the defensive side of the ball. Offensively, they struggled to pull away until the fourth quarter. That's something that people are not talking about. But yeah, that's a really good point. If we do playoff expansion, we're going to start to see more of these blowouts, like when the number 2 team plays against the number 7 team, or if the number 3 team plays against the number 6 team. That is something that we have to think of. We're talking about if they do playoff expansion, should all the conference winners, all the Power 5 conference winners be in if they do expand it?
I think so. Yeah. I think just comparing group of 5 to Power 5, there's a reason Cincinnati, took this long for a group of 5 to make it. And I think even if UCF made it, they would have gotten run out of town. So I think that, just giving those Power 5 teams a chance and then opening up the possibility to these group of 5s like a Cincinnati this year, who is deserving, and I think played Alabama well. But I definitely think the Power 5 programs are justified to get that automatic qualifier.
I agree. I think that Power Fives definitely deserve automatic qualifiers, but I don't necessarily think it needs to go into seeding, because there may be an at-large team, say Georgia or Alabama this year, whoever doesn't win the SEC, who has a better schedule, better ranking, all this kind of stuff. They shouldn't be ranked lower than a Pac-12 team that won their conference at a 9-3 record, 10-2 record. So I think the Pac-12 definitely deserves a spot, but not necessarily needs to be higher ranked than some of these other teams who make it in because of the at-large bid.
Yeah, I think it's justified.
Yeah,
but I think there's also another issue that comes with expanding the college football playoffs is now you're adding another game to these schedules. So you have these 12 game schedules, and then you're adding a third game for the playoffs. So now these players are playing 15 games in a season. I mean, some of those games are probably only playing a quarter or two when you're bringing in random podunk schools, but still you're having added games, you're increasing this injury risk. Are you going to see some of the, like from the 1-2 seeds, are you going to see some of these players sitting out for that first game, for that quarterfinal game, because it's like, well, we're expected to win. So, or you're going to see these players playing these games, which is probably the more likely situation, and then getting injured, losing draft stock, that kind of thing. Or are you going to see less regular season games? Are they going to take away some of those out of conference games so that these teams can have an 11-game schedule and then play 3 playoff games? So it's not excessive amount of games for these players to be playing and increasing this injury risk. I think that's another point that doesn't get thought about too much.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I was just about to bring that up. I mean, we get a lot of talk about when the college football playoff happened that we're adding an extra game, and you're saying now you're adding 3 more games. Well, think about if they're also in the conference championship, that's 16 games. I mean, that's a previous full NFL season. So yeah, the added injury risk is something to be thought of. That's why you're seeing a lot of kids opt out of bowl games, because they don't want to affect their draft stock, which that's perfectly up to them, which is another talk for another day. But still, yeah, you're right. I mean, we could talk about playoff expansion all we want, but the question is it good for the players themselves? That's the question.
I think that's fair. Yeah, I think it's justified. I think for you could make the argument, that it might not be the best, but I do see Sam's points there, so it makes sense. So we shall see.
Yeah, we shall see. If they do decide to do playoff expansion, when should it happen? mean, when's a good time to do playoff expansion? Or when do you think it will happen?
I think a good time, if they're going to do it, is next season. I think the quicker they get it done and kind of get it worked out, everything like that, the better. I mean, I don't think playoff expansion would be a bad idea for NCAA because, I mean, that's another top tier games that they can bill as like, this is must see football that you need to tune in and watch. So it's just going to mean, from a business side, it's more money for them.
Yeah, nothing really to add. I kind of agree with Sam's points there.
So those are the 3 topics that we wanted to cover, but we're going to do a little bit more. So I asked both of them to say a few words on a few things. Ahmed, I'm going to start with you. I wanted you to say a few words on the 2023 class in the DMV. So what do you have to say about this class? Like, what position's sticking out and how many big-time players could we see out of this class?
I mean, Nicholas Harbor's the guy that, he's a generational talent out of this cycle. But I'm really interested to see kind of where he develops at first. I definitely felt that, offensive side of the ball, I thought he would be great. But then, you watch just how quick he is, runs 4'4", 6'5", 240 pounds. I mean, he's truly a specimen when you think about watching him develop as an outside backer, as a pass rusher. That's also certainly intriguing. So I think pretty universally he's considered as that athlete tag, drawing both sides of the ball. But, you have running back and Devin Roche, he's local, couple of wide receivers in the WCAC. But I think the position group that is undoubtedly the strongest is the defensive line. I mean, you got Jason Moore, Desmond Umeozulu, a couple others, Anthony Little, Isaiah Neal, Mason Robinson. And then on the other side of the ball, the offensive side, Kahari Finley, Evan Lank, there's a couple others, things like that. And then on the defensive, one guy I didn't mention, Deshaun Womack as well, out of St. Francis, really talented prospect. And I believe I posted a big board on the Inside the Black and Gold with prospects to know, things like that, and have multiple 4-stars listed, most of them being local, things like that. So definitely strong locally. I'd say in the trenches, it's a lot more depth guys that'll come out. And then I think in the secondary, you could see a couple of sleepers. Taufik Bird, he's 3-star product out of DeMatha. I think he's going to be a really good prospect and someone that's going to command more Power 5 attention as the cycle goes on. But when you talk about position group that sticks out, it's definitely defensive line.
Thank you, Ahmed. Sam, I asked you to say a few words on the quarterback class in the 2022 NFL draft. Floor is all yours.
Yeah, so I think this quarterback class is getting a lot of flack for not being as talented as previous quarterback classes. But I think that this one is better than people realize. So my quick top 5, and I'll go quick rationale on why I feel this order. Quick top 5: 1, Malik Willis from Liberty; 2, Kenny Pickett from Pitt. I know. 3, Desmond Rider from Cincinnati; Matt Corral from Ole Miss; and then 5, Carson Strong, Nevada. So here's why I went through that top 5. I think when you have a decrease in that top end quarterback talent, I think teams care more about potential and less about NFL readiness. And I think Malik Willis has the best potential of the class. So without a guy who's clear-cut number 1, I think teams are taking more of a risk on these physically gifted but need some time, i.e. your Trey Lances, your Patrick Mahomes. Not saying he's Patrick Mahomes or anything like that.
No one's ever going to be Patrick Mahomes, let's be honest.
I think teams care more about that potential when you have this lack of top end. I think Kenny Pickett has your highest floor out of all of these guys. He kind of reminds me,
which is not a bad thing. Let's be honest, it's not a bad thing.
He reminds me of kind of Joe Burrow coming out as a guy who doesn't have that elite arm strength, who doesn't have pinpoint accuracy, but he can make all the throws and he can hit all of the targets, and he has mobility. He's a little bit more mobile than Joe Burrow, I feel. Number 3, I really like Desmond Rider. He has a lot of experience. He's played 49 games. He's athletic, has an NFL arm, and he performed well in the Senior Bowl from what I was seeing. I didn't watch the actual game just because I was caught up with things, but during the practice and all that, he was doing really well.
I watched the game. Yeah, Desmond Rider, Kenny Pickett, I think Malik Willis, and Sam Howell. All 4 of those, I think, either increased their draft stock or kept it where it should be.
Right. And then our guy from Ole Miss, who did not play in the Senior Bowl because he was not a senior, was not graduating. I think he's going to be forgotten about a little bit at this point just because he's not the name people are talking about. But I think he's a talented player. He's a good athlete. He has a good release, good arm. The issue with him is he's coming from an RPO style offense at Ole Miss, and he's doing a lot of quick one reads and that thing. So his being able to adapt to the NFL, I think, is going to be his biggest concern. And then I have Carson Strong at number 5. That number 5 spot is kind of up in the air. There's a couple people that you could put there. I think Sam Howell is another one of guys that I wouldn't disagree with if you had him at number 5. But I think when you have guys who are true pocket passers like Carson Strong is, he's not an overly athletic guy. You got to see how they work in the pocket, and he does have good pocket presence. He has a good arm. He attacks tight windows, that kind of thing. He does have knocks on him, and that's why he's number 5. But just that quick number 5 of Malik Willis at 1, Kenny Pickett, Desmond Rider, Matt Corral, Carson Strong, and at 5. I think that's what I got at this point.
All right. Lastly, I'm going to talk a few things about the Super Bowl. Now, this is not my Super Bowl preview. That's going to be later this week. But really, I think we are in for a really, really good Super Bowl. I think both these teams definitely earned their right to be in this game. It's going to be interesting to see. You have Matthew Stafford, who's been in the league since 2009, finally getting to a Super Bowl after all those years at Detroit in his first year with the Rams. And then Joe Burrow basically turning around the Bengals. Nobody expected the Bengals to get here, and yet here they are. So I think we are in for a really good Super Bowl, and I think it could come down to the very last minute. All right, so that was a college football roundtable with Sam and Ahmed. I got a few videos besides the Super Bowl preview coming up soon. Keep you guys informed. Guys, thank you so much for joining me. And as always,
appreciate you having me, man.
And as always, I will see you guys next time.